Whenever I looked for obscure PS3 and Xbox 360 games, NieR and the Drakengard series always popped up, but I never got to own both consoles, so I've only heard about all the praise and clunkiness of those games. Years later, I picked up NieR Automata and I completely fell in love with it. It had such a brilliant story, and the gameplay was so unique because it was constantly shifting genres. When I heard that the prequel was going to be updated and released in 2021, I knew that I had to experience it myself. One thing that I found interesting about Replicant is that it's actually an upgraded version of a Japan-exclusive game. This version has better graphics, gameplay, new voice lines, cutscenes, and an all-new ending that wraps everything together. It's also the first time that everyone can experience this version of the game outside of Japan. The game that was released in English over 10 years ago was actually NieR Gestalt. It's basically the same game, except instead of a young brother protagonist, the one in Gestalt is a dad. The reason for that difference is because higher-ups at Square Enix thought that a more mature protagonist would have better appeal to Western audiences at the time, so they thought only Japanese audiences would want to play as a pretty boy. When I think about it now, I think that it's a weird decision to make, and I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way. But looking at the major games released in 2010, I guess releasing Gestalt was a safe option at the time. So yeah, with all of that said, let's dive into NieR Replicant. In NieR Replicant version 1.22474487139, you play as NieR, a boy who's taking care of his sister Yona after she contracts an illness called the Black Scrawl. The protagonist doesn't have an official name, by the way, so I'll just refer to him as NieR. There is no known cure for the Black Scrawl, but he sets out anyway to find something that can help her. Along the way, he meets Grimoire Weiss, an old talking book that holds the key to cure his sister. This is a general summary of the game, but the story is a bit stranger with more details. Like, it actually begins in modern-day Tokyo, with NieR defending his sister from strange monsters called Shades. It's a gloomy start, but it also serves as a tutorial to the game's combat. After that, there's a time skip of exactly 1,412 years. NieR and Yona are still alive, by the way, but this time they're living in a small village, and yes, Yona is still sick. If this is your first time hearing about the game's story, then I know that you have a lot of questions. Anyway, you'll gain control of NieR, and you'll be working on tasks given by the villagers, all for the sake of Yona. The game starts off slow because of this, but I thought it was a perfect setup. And it was an unusual introduction for a JRPG. I'm sure that if you've played a lot of games in this genre, then you know how grand the stories are. The main character usually has to save the world from a boss that turns into a god or something. Now, NieR's world also has a lot of stuff happening. Like, you learn early on about how the Black Scrawl is threatening humanity's remaining population, and if that wasn't bad enough, Shades roam the fields outside of their village. But none of that actually matters to NieR. His only goal is to make sure that Yona and him survive. The villagers know this, so they give him odd jobs to get by. The first hour or so of the game will be spent doing things like hunting and delivering medicinal herbs. It's a way to introduce you to the game's fetch quest nature, sure, but I thought that this whole section was an effective way of letting the player bond with NieR and Yona, which is very important for a story-driven game like this. Now, NieR Replicant's combat is primarily hack and slash, so you'll perform combos while parrying and dodging in between enemy attacks. You'll gain access to one-handed swords at the start of the game, but later on you'll get two-handed swords and spears. The weapons felt similar to each other though, the biggest difference were their base damage and attack speed. Now with Weiss, you'll be able to cast sealed verses, which are magic spells. Each one has a unique ability, like shooting out bursts of magic, or summoning spears that pierce through enemies. You can even add magical buffs to weapons and other abilities using words. They add things like increased attack power and XP gain. They're dropped by Shades from time to time, so you'll get a lot of them throughout the game. But yeah, the sealed verses and words are one of the more unique mechanics for me, because I thought that the combat overall was basic. It was fun to fight through hordes of enemies though, and I really liked the boss battles because of their special attacks. Just like NieR Automata, a lot of them would release orbs that turned the game into a bullet hell experience. It always felt great to maneuver through them. The game often switches genres like this, so sometimes it will go from side-scroller to top-down shooter. One section even felt like a survival horror game, and another was isometric. There were even a few points in the game that were text-based, so you go from fighting tons of enemies to reading blocks of text for a couple of minutes. It can be quite jarring if you're used to games that stay the same thing from beginning to end, but I think that the experimental nature of the game is what makes its gameplay more interesting and memorable. There's even an optional garden in the game that you can use. Yes, NieR Replicant has gardening. NieR has a garden next to his house, so once you unlock spaces for planting, you can grow flowers, fruits, and other stuff. The catch is, you need to wait 24 real-time hours to grow everything. Sure, you can add fertilizer to speed things up, but this game is obviously not as polished as an actual life sim. Planting seeds one by one and watering them got very tedious because of how slow the animation was. I ended up forgetting about the garden halfway through my first playthrough. Another optional activity is fishing. I thought it was fun, but I always enjoy fishing in games, so this is a very biased opinion. I have to admit though that NieR Replicant has the most difficult fishing questline that I've ever played in a video game so far. I literally watched tutorials online just so I could figure out the logistics behind catching some of the fish. I had to learn how to catch the ones that bite in like half a second, and how to successfully hook them in. To explain the mechanics briefly, after you hook a fish, you have to deplete its health by tilting your rod to the opposite direction. The problem was, some of the rare fish took a lot of time to hook in, literally minutes. If you fail to drain its health after a while, the line will snap. What's worse is that unlike fishing minigames in other titles, rare fish in NieR Replicant require RNG, so you might end up catching like 20 common fish before you get the one you're looking for. This is why completing the last few quests was kind of a nightmare. I still shudder when I think about how I spent nearly 5 minutes struggling with a rhizodont fish. But yeah, I finished the entire quest line for some reason. I don't recommend doing it unless you're a completionist or you really like fishing. Now that I've finished talking about the gameplay, what I really want to talk about in detail is everything else. It's no secret that NieR Replicant is a flawed game. It's driven by its plot and characters, so your enjoyment will rely heavily on how emotionally invested you are in its story and cast. As NieR goes on his journey, he ends up meeting Kaine, an intense woman who runs around in lingerie, and Emil, a sweet boy who wants nothing but the best for his friends. Even Vice becomes a good companion. It was really hard not to get attached to them throughout the game. I loved listening to their banter, and all of them have very different personalities, so their conversations were entertaining. Like, Vice is a really old book, so it made sense that he's conservative and has this sort of old-timey way of talking. Now put him together with an outspoken, foul-mouthed character like Kaine, and it made for a lot of hilarious conversations.
Tear out your goddamn eyes. Piss in the sockets.
Good sweet lord.
Interactions like this made the cast really fun, but what made them even better was how flawed they were. Nobody was perfect, and everyone was carrying their own baggage. I love that about them because it made them feel more real, like they really weren't a couple of heroes on a righteous quest. They make questionable decisions throughout the story, yet they always accepted things and moved on. That was a recurring theme in the game. Outside of their own actions, the main cast would push forward, even when horrible things happened to them and the people around them. I thought it was a lovely theme because this game is depressing, like really depressing. One tragedy occurs after another throughout the game, so the theme of making the best out of a situation was a wonderful message. Things got melodramatic at times, but I didn't think it took too much away from the game, and it's all thanks to the voice acting and music. Almost every character had spectacular voice acting, so it gave more of an impact to emotional scenes, even though some of the dialogue got a little corny. And the music, oh my god, I don't know where to start. I can definitely say that NieR Replicant has one of the best soundtracks that I've ever heard in gaming. Those melodramatic scenes I mentioned earlier, I still teared up while watching them, and I'm sure it's mostly because of the music. It's crazy how much emotion the vocal tracks draw out, even though they're sung in a made-up language. And of course, the music in boss fights was just as epic. There are different variations to each track, depending on the situation they're used in. It makes every song a joy to listen to. I think my only complaint about the music is that some of the tracks were overused, but I think it only became a problem because of the game's repetitiveness. In order to view the entire story of NieR Replicant, you need to play the game 5 times, getting ending A to ending E. Thankfully, you start at the halfway point of the story on your second playthrough, so you don't need to play through the entire game exactly, but I can see how it might turn a lot of people away. Like, it's easy to ignore the side quests if you don't like fetching random items, but for the main quests, you can't skip anything, so you'll have to go back and forth through the same locations. What's worse is the only way to get ending E of the game is to collect all 33 weapons. Some can be purchased, others are encountered along the way, but the rest need to be acquired through a few side quests and side content. It's a hassle if you're tired of doing the same quests, but on a narrative level, I think it's absolutely worth it. Each route gives you different perspectives as well as a few new cutscenes that will definitely change the way that you view the game. If you're familiar with NieR Automata, then you'll probably notice a lot of similarities. But just like its sequel, I think that NieR Replicant is an interactive experience that can only be told through video games as a medium. Still, I would be lying if I said that I wasn't worn out by the 4th playthrough, but after completing ending E, I had no regrets. I don't know exactly how long it took me to complete NieR Replicant, but it probably took over 50 hours to do some side content while playing through every ending. Despite its rough edges, I think that NieR Replicant is a wonderful game. Its gameplay isn't something to write home about, there's a lot of dated mechanics here, but its direction, plot, and strong cast of characters make up for it. I can honestly say that it's up there with NieR Automata as one of the best games that I've ever played. I highly recommend NieR Replicant if you want to experience a tragic but beautiful story. Let me know what you thought about the video. Man, I love NieR Replicant so much. There are a few things that I think Automata did better, but I appreciated Replicant's little quirks. Anyway, the year is ending and I hope everyone's doing fine. I doubt I can squeeze in another video this month, so enjoy the holidays and yeah, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.